This podcast is for anyone who has ever felt stuck, whether it's a major life transition, a dark night of the soul, or just staying small out of fear. If you've ever struggled to move forward, if you're repeating unhealthy patterns in relationships, or you have a black belt in beating yourself up, you were meant for more, and this podcast is for you. We'll get real, we'll get vulnerable, we'll probably cuss a little bit, and we'll get to the root of it all, your self-worth. With every step, you'll find the courage to rise. Welcome back to another episode of the Courage to Rise podcast. Today, we're going to talk about why learning and understanding how to regulate your own nervous system is truly a revolutionary act. It is one of the key components of truly owning and mastering your own personal power. And when I say personal power, I'm really talking about your own inner self-mastery, because the too long didn't read of this is once we have achieved inner mastery, we literally are unfuckwithable. You've heard me talk before on a previous mini episode about what I mean when I say unfuckwithable, but this is the path toward inner mastery, because when you have achieved inner mastery, and remember, that's not perfection. Perfect doesn't exist. Perfect's not a thing. But when you have achieved the ability to master your inner world and to know how to dance with your inner world, and you know your inner world so well that you truly are the master of the amazing entity being that is you, literally nothing outside of you can fuck with you. And that is the definition of being unfuckwithable, right? And so when I say personal power, pretty much everything I teach and everything that I coach clients on is ultimately about coming back to your personal power. And that has multiple elements. First and foremost, it's understanding how we're wired as humans, understanding what is happening unconsciously within us. It's understanding the degrees and the levels and the ways that we have been unconsciously giving that power away to sources outside of ourselves. And it's understanding how to bring it back within ourselves. Now, don't worry, there's no light switch that you all of a sudden have it or you don't. Remember, all of this is about an evolution in our consciousness. It's about you understanding more about yourself so that you're evolving up this spiral of personal power, of embodiment, of inner mastery. And there are a lot of reasons why this is important. But for today's episode, I'm going to stick with what seems to be very much top of mind for most people right now in our current climate, which is when there are a lot of things going on around us that are particularly challenging and confronting either to our sense of human decency, human fairness, human compassion, fill in the blank, it can really rattle us, it can really break us down, and it can really take a toll on our systems. And what learning to regulate your own nervous system, learning to regulate your own emotional health, what that all does is it makes you so motherfucking powerful that you are so in control of your own inner world that now you are resourced. You guys hear me talk about this all the time because it's critical. It's you're resourced now to be able to interact with that outside world that might be showing you things that fly in the face of your own inner beliefs and ways of feeling other humans should be treated. But it puts you back in a position of power where nothing outside of you gets to control how you feel inside. And this is truly how each one of us, if each person individually takes that radical self-responsibility to say, I'm going to spend the time, I'm going to spend the energy to understand how my system is wired, to understand how to regulate my own nervous system, to understand how to work with my own emotions, how to work with the feelings that I have, to understand just enough. You don't have to have a certificate or a degree in neuroscience or biology to understand how to work with this human machine that your soul is living in, right? How to work with the meat suit that you're embodying in this incarnation. Because when you understand that, then all of a sudden you're taking your power back. You're no longer at the mercy of things outside of you. And you understand that if you open up the news and you're reading something that's creating a feeling within you, all of a sudden you start to realize, wait a minute, I'm allowing this thing outside of me to unconsciously create a feeling in myself of frustration, of anger, of despair, of all those things. And I always have to put the disclaimers on it. None of it is saying that you're regulating your nervous system and going, tra-la-la, it's fine, these horrible things are happening. No, that's not it at all. But what this is about is you not getting so sucked into it that you then lose all of your ability to regulate yourself and to be showing up in your own inner balance so that you can actually help and serve in the way that you were uniquely designed to help and serve. Because I will tell you this, and this is not about conspiracy theories or anything else, this is just literally facts, is how you control humans is with their emotions, right? If you can feed people a certain type of emotion and get them in a certain place where basically now you've gotten them in some type of survival mode, then all of a sudden your entire system is operating from a dysregulated place. And then all of a sudden you're looking for something or someone outside of you to save you. And all of a sudden, all of your power is gone, right? And I won't get too far down that rabbit hole because, Lord have mercy, we'd be here forever. But the point I want to make in this is you understanding how to regulate your own nervous system truly is a revolutionary act, because that means you're not going to get pulled around like the dog with the chew toy shaking his head around, or the squeaky toy, right? Because that's kind of sometimes how it feels when we're looking at the news, when we're watching these things, is you're being shaken around by whatever's happening in external world events. And that's a very dangerous place to be, because that means you don't have your power anymore. All of your power has been given away to things that are happening outside of you. And when you know how to regulate your nervous system, you disconnect from being controlled by your outer environment. And you're quite literally saying, I get to choose how I feel because I know how to regulate myself. I know that I ultimately am the one that gets to decide how I feel. And I'm not going to be controlled by my environment. I'm going to decide that no matter what's happening around me, here's how I'm going to feel and how I'm going to be in my inner world and how I'm going to regulate myself. Because when I do that, I inherently become a force of good in the world, a force of good for myself, first and foremost. And then when I am taking care of myself, then I can help serve in whatever way I was uniquely designed to serve. So, mini biology lesson, right? You've probably heard me say before, we're basically monkeys with iPhones. The human biology is still operating with hundreds of thousand-year-old programming. And we have this modern world that we live in. We have all of this technology and all of these things, but our body and our system hasn't evolved to catch up with that, which is not bad or good. It's just the awareness of, oh, I need to understand that my body is unconsciously responding to a biological imperative to keep me alive. And your body doesn't know that the email you got from your boss isn't the same as a saber-toothed tiger about to eat you. And it really is a fundamental, foundational truth of understanding everything about how we as humans are wired, because we are biologically wired for survival. And all of those processes are unconscious processes. Only about 5% of what you do on a daily basis is conscious. 60 to 80,000 thoughts a day, 95% of those thoughts are unconscious. 95% of the processes that are going on in your body or more are unconscious. You're not thinking about digesting the food you just ate. You're not thinking about your bladder processing the coffee that you had this morning. You're not thinking about beating your heart. You're not thinking about any of those things. Even if you get as granular as, if I wanted to stand up from this chair, I don't have to tell my body, okay, so now you have to activate this muscle in my leg and this muscle in my back and da 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 da. Like, you just do it automatically, because that's the incredible genius of our biological design, is that all of these things are happening and you don't have to think about it. But guess what that means? That means that those unconscious survival mechanisms are also operating unconsciously. And when they've done that so many times, our brains and our body are efficient. And so I always tell people, your brain's going to form a macro, like what amounts to a macro in Excel, right? Or an automation on your iPhone. Like, it's going to make it super efficient. So if you're constantly having anxious thoughts, your brain's going to make it that much easier for you to have anxious thoughts. Because and I'm so skating over this. This is such a deeper topic than this, but I'm giving you a high level overview. There's a feedback loop. When you think a thought, you create a chemical. You create a chemical, that chemical feeds a thought. You have that thought again, it creates the chemical again, and it creates this feedback loop. And because our bodies and our brains are so efficient, eventually it's going to form a macro where it doesn't take anything for you to get anxious at all. It'll just happen all of a sudden. That's why we have anxiety attacks, right? Or panic attacks. Guess what? It can work the other way, where you can have a love attack or a gratitude attack, but it takes reconditioning your body, because you've been unconsciously conditioned in a certain way, and it's unconscious because you didn't realize it was happening. So going back to this concept of survival, everything in us, from the time we're 0 to 7 years old, we are completely permeable. Our brains are in a certain brainwave state. Things are going in. We are 100% in survival mode. We're reliant on our parents or whoever our caregivers were to help keep us alive. And so that's why when you hear people, talk about, well, I don't understand why I have a fear of abandonment, it may not track back to what we would consider a quote unquote logical event, right? You're like, I don't understand. My parents didn't leave me. I had, all these things. You have to understand that there's an unconscious decision that was made at some point about your survival, and you're operating from unconscious programs, right? So I'm really throwing a lot of stuff into one podcast. I'm like skating over the top of what could be entire courses and what I teach all my clients. So let me bring this, let me pull this back around. So when we're operating from our unconscious, it's basically our survival mechanisms. Okay. So the biological imperative of the species is to survive. So anything that looks like it's a threat externally is going to create an internal reaction. And because operating unconsciously means you don't have to think about spiking your cortisol levels or increasing your adrenaline levels so that you can run faster or not, right? So if you think about, if you're a zebra on the plains in the Serengeti and you're sitting there grazing and all of a sudden there's a predator in the bushes, if you had to stop and think about how to activate your body and make it move fast, like, you'd already be prey, right? You'd be dinner. And these things happen in a split second, where that zebra's body all of a sudden starts to produce certain chemicals and it starts to activate certain things so it can fight, flight, or freeze, right? So in that case, it's going to run. So it's activating certain processes in the body so that it will flee. Well, guess what? Those same things are activating within you. And we so often discount. We do this all the time. We discount ourselves. Well, I don't know why that made me so upset. I don't know why I got so anxious. Because your body thought you were gonna die. Like, I don't know any other way to say it. That's literally it. And you can trace everything back to some kind of survival mechanism, right? So why are we stressed out at work? We're stressed out at work because if I don't get this project in on time, if I don't close this deal, if somebody's not happy with me, guess what? I'll lose my job. Then what happens? Well, my job is related to my income, which is related to my housing and all my basic needs. And so if I don't have a job and I don't have income and I don't have money and I don't have food, then oh my God, I'm going to die. Okay. And then if you add in, if you have a family or anything else to protect, how about relationships? Okay. So, well, I don't know why, like, I can't keep a relationship. Every man or woman I meet, this happens. And you have all these feelings of abandonment. Well, why? Because you've made an association that being in partnership means you're going to survive, that you're going to be fine. Because if you go back to thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago, when we were tribal, right, and living around the fire, if you were kicked out of the tribe, you're going to die, right? So it's the same way we, social settings, all these other things, and we have all this anxiety about, well, what if people don't like me? What if this? What if this? What if that? Well, there's nothing wrong with you. There's an internal biological mechanism that's just like running roughshod all over your consciousness. And this is understanding that all of these processes that are happening, somewhere in it had an intelligent reason, right? If you start to really understand that concept, that there's nothing wrong with you if you're dysregulated, there's nothing wrong with you if you're navigating your way through triggers, there's nothing wrong with you if you're having emotional responses that are more intense than you want them to be and lasting longer than you want them to be. There's nothing wrong with you. Your system is infinitely intelligent and it's been trying to protect you from something. But in our modern world, it gets way out of balance, right? And so when I say that learning to regulate your own nervous system is truly a revolutionary act, it's saying that you are taking control back of understanding your system, understanding how you unconsciously got wired in a certain way, because it's not just about, yes, it's 100% about your own well-being, right? But it also, as we move into interesting times in our world where we can't really trust what's in the media, we can't really trust any news outlet to be communicating actual news. It's just all designed to whip you up into an emotional frenzy one way or another. I don't care what side you're on. It's all designed to whip you up into an emotional frenzy. And then you start not knowing who or what you can trust. I talked about that on my last episode, or one of the last episodes, about like AI and learning your inner trust. This is how you actually really truly become a revolutionary, because it's saying, I'm going to understand my systems. I'm going to understand my cycles. I'm going to understand my own brain and body and how they work together. I'm going to understand my heart and how that plays into this. Because when you understand all those things and you understand those things that have been operating unconsciously, guess what? Then you start to understand how to reprogram them. Because no, you're not doomed or destined if your anxiety is a big one, right? Can't imagine why. Anxiety is a big one in our society. It doesn't have to be that way. And it just drives me up a fucking wall that we've normalized that this is how it is, right? It's good to talk about the fact that, like, so that people don't feel alone that they're experiencing these things. It's good to say, wow, I'm experiencing this, but we shouldn't normalize it, because it is not a normal way of being. Living stressed out, anxious, burned out, all these things, that is not a normal way of being. And the answer is not taking a fucking pill and then taking 6 more pills to fix whatever the first pill broke. But God, that's a whole other podcast too. Man, I am on one today, y'all. So understanding how to regulate your nervous system means that you start to understand that whatever it is that you're experiencing has become a habituated pattern in your body. If every single time you open the news or every single time you open social media, your body has some kind of reaction to it, here's the thing that's going to blow your minds. Just like you can get addicted to a drug or to a video game or to gambling, you can get addicted to your emotions, and you can get addicted to negative emotions. Because you're probably going to tell me, well, Jen, why the hell would I want to continue to feel anxious? And I'm going to say, well, I don't know, boo, but you keep doing it and you're really good at it. You keep scrolling on social media, even though it doesn't make you feel good. And you keep looking at this, even though it doesn't make you feel good. So why do we do things that aren't good for us? Usually because there's a conditioning that's happening, right? And so it's just become a habituated pattern. And the good news is that you can interrupt a habituated pattern and you can reprogram yourself, but it starts with understanding that it's happening in the first place. So with your nervous system, basically what that is your nervous system is the thing that's it's how your heart beats. It's regulating the systems in your body. And so if you've probably heard people say, well, if somebody is like anxious or overly excited or some of you just take a deep breath, calm down. Well, first of all, no one in the history of calming down has ever calmed down when they've been told to calm down. So we know not to say that. But why you use your breath, first of all, is because you've always got it with you, right? If you don't, you have bigger problems. But the breath helps to regulate your system because guess what? As I said, we're operating from this million-year-old programming. And so when our bodies are responding to what it's perceiving as a threat, there's a certain sequence of events that's happening in your body. Your heart races, your breath gets shallow, all of the blood goes away from your internal organs and into your hands so you can run, fight, or hide, right? So when you're experiencing that, there's a physiological reaction in your body. So the reason why breathing, as an example, and there are other techniques as well that I teach, but breathing as an example helps to regulate you is because it's literally creating the feedback loop that I'm safe, right? Think of it as hacking the system because unconsciously your heart rate increased, your breath got shallow and faster. And now what you're doing is you're breathing in slowly and out slowly. And you do that enough times and your brain is reading that and it's going, wait a minute, you're not doing that super fast breathing, shallow breathing thing that you do when we're under threat. So wait, this might mean that we're actually safe. Hold on. All right, well, let me start to release okay, well, we're safe. We're not going to die. Okay, well, let me start to bring your system back down again. That's one way that you self-regulate, like super oversimplification, but trying to make this bite-sized so you can start to wrap your mind around these concepts of why these things actually work. And it's the same thing I've taught. I taught my free class on 3 ways to chill the fuck out. And I taught this exercise that you can do. I like to give people tools, and because I do it in my own life, that you can do absolutely anywhere that are super quick, right? Because if you have time, we don't have time to stop in the middle of whatever panic attack we're having at work and hold on, I got to go meditate for an hour. No, you do the meditation there's lots of reasons why you do the meditation, but think of it as a preemptive thing, right? You're balancing your nervous system in advance so that when something happens, it's easier for you to regulate. But again, whole other podcast for the sake of this one. When you are understanding how your system works and you're understanding that it's kind of like it's giving false positives to an external stimulus. And you really have to ask yourself, I feel my body reacting. I feel my body going into some kind of anxiety, some kind of fight or flight system is being activated. Is there really a threat? And literally in that moment, looking around, am I about to be eaten by something? Am I about to, what's going on in my environment? No, I'm sitting on my couch. Okay, I'm safe, right? And you can ground yourself back to that. That works really well for some people, looking at your environment and going, nope, I'm safe. And sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's not enough. And that's okay because everybody's at a different place with this. I completely got off topic of the peripheral vision. Oh my goodness. Okay. So regulating yourself, like I said, you're sitting on the couch, you're having a panic attack or anxiety attack. You can start to look around and consciously tell yourself that you're safe, right? I'm not about to be eaten. I'm fine. And then, like I said, with breathing and slowing your breath, and there are different types of breathing that you can do, you're telling your body it's okay because you're hacking the system, basically. You're saying, I'm safe because my breathing has slowed down because you're consciously slowing your breathing. And the peripheral vision exercise that I got off on a tangent before I told you about that I give people is you basically When you are in fight or flight mode, you are hyper focused on the threat. You narrow your focus on the threat, because if you're out on the Serengeti and you're about to get attacked by something, it's not the time to be taking in all the birds and the water feature and the this and the that that's on the plains, right? You got to narrow your focus on what's about to attack you so you can figure out where to run, how to fight, or where to hide, right? So your focus gets super, super narrow. Well, when you're not about to be attacked by something, your focus doesn't have to be narrow like that anymore. So it gets to open back up again. So I gave you the analogy of the zebra. So the zebra is just there grazing on the plains. It sees a predator, it senses a predator, all of its systems get activated, it hyper-focuses on it, adrenaline, cortisol, all the chemicals to run away. Then once it's safe, it's going to go right back to grazing again, right? It's going to go right back to just, there's no more threat anymore. The focus gets to be diffuse again. You no longer have to hyper-focus on the threat. Well, again, the threat, the quote-unquote threat, at this point in our evolution, we're usually creating from our thoughts, right? There's not actually a tiger in the room with you that's about to eat you. And so when we're creating it with our thoughts, then we can help to use our thoughts to reverse engineer that, right? Just like I said, the breathing helps you slow your system, which tells your whole body I'm safe. Well, so with the peripheral vision exercise, as opposed to being super hyper-focused and narrow-focused, you're basically expanding your focus out. If you've watched that free training, you're expanding that focus out. And when you're doing that, you're literally physiologically sending the signal, I'm safe, because your body and your brain are going, well, you wouldn't be opening your focus if there were still a threat here, right? So it really is that what I'm telling you is the more that you understand how your biology, how your neuroscience works, the more you can then use that knowledge to self-regulate, right? And like I said, you don't have to have a PhD in this. You don't have to go to school and you literally are a walking experiment of these things, right? So what my intention with this all over the place squirrely podcast is to start to raise your awareness and start to bring your consciousness to the fact that first and foremost, these things are unconsciously happening in your body. Secondly, that they've gotten conditioned that way. There's nothing wrong with you. Thirdly, that you can actually recondition those processes. And fourthly, you have the ultimate power over yourself. It is a matter of understanding, having the awareness, and then practicing and reconditioning yourself. And that's one of the biggest things I think sometimes you've heard me talk before about having patience with the process is we want instantaneous results, and we so oftentimes don't give as much, we don't give ourselves the credit that it literally took us a long time to get how we are, right? If you're listening to my podcast, my audience is all over the place, but you're not a 5-year-old, right? So you have had decades on this planet that you've lived unconsciously, and your body has gotten conditioned in a certain way. So guess what, baby cakes? It ain't gonna happen overnight. You got to retrain your body. And that's the exciting part, because that gives you the power back to say, okay, now I understand my body and my systems have been reacting a certain way because I got conditioned. My body and my system is still thinking that I'm operating in some kind of traumatic event, right? If you have a trauma that you're working through. And I understand that my knowledge of my body and my system and how to work with my brain and my body is actually my superpower, because that teaches you how to start to self-regulate. It's really the key to self-mastery and inner work. There's a friend of mine that tells a story about how, and he's been in this work forever, of understanding and regulating your body and your heart and your breathing and your nervous system. And he tells a story about how his ability and his experience having done that allowed him he was in Lebanon, and it gave him the presence to be in a very traumatic and challenging situation and to help to rescue his grandmother from under the rubble, because he had the ability to regulate his own system, right? There was an extremely traumatic event that was happening, extremely chaotic event that was going on around him. But because he had understood these tools and he'd been practicing these tools for years, he was able to regulate his body and his system enough to be calm in the face of that chaos. Now, obviously, that's an extreme example, but I mean, frankly, with the world today, who knows, right? It's just, there are a million reasons to learn to regulate your own nervous system, but I think it's never been more important than it is now for you to really start to bring conscious awareness to these things. Because otherwise, what happens when we don't is we continue to look to things outside of ourselves. We continue to look at, well, I'm taking this medication, but it's not working. So up my dose and up my dose and up my dose and add this and add that. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. I don't want to get down that rabbit hole, but we overprescribe in this country for things that could be resolved by just teaching people how to work with their own systems. But don't get me on that. Follow the dollar. Anyway, so when you start to understand that, first of all, you also start to understand there's nothing fucking wrong with you. Your system has just been operating to protect you for your entire life, and it's just out of whack with where you want to be. You learn to regulate your own system. It truly is a revolutionary act because nothing outside of you can control you now. Nothing outside of you has the power to control you because you can feel it. You can go, woo, I am definitely dysregulated right now. I need to go stand on the earth and ground. I need to do some breathing practices. I need to use the tools Jen gave me. I need to do whatever's in your toolkit that's your go-to to regulate yourself. Because ultimately, that is the most profound act of self-love that I can possibly think of, because I started all of this work based on the foundation of self-love. And I don't know anything that is a more profound act of self-love than learning to regulate your own system and learning all about your inner world and your inner mastery. So literally nothing outside of you can ever control you. And it's not to say you won't get affected by things that happen. I mean, you're not an android, for God's sakes. But what it means is that if something happens around you, you're going to have a response to it, but then you're not going to allow that response to become a way of being, right? You're not going to allow that response to continue to last and live in your life and in your body to the point where it becomes a mood and a temperament and your personality, right? So learning to regulate your own nervous system, learning all about how your body reacts and responds. And this is the fun part. You get to be curious. Like, we're all fascinated with ourselves. I don't care what anybody says. We're all self-absorbed and fascinated with ourselves. And that's not a bad thing. Let's just use it for the purposes of helping to educate ourselves on ourselves and learning more about how we act and react. So then we can learn what we want to do about it. So start to get curious and start to notice when you get activated, because maybe you've paid attention to it before, maybe you haven't. If this is the first time and this is your first introduction to any of this, then I have just given you a fuck ton of information. Go back and listen to it again. But you will start to, I think one of the most incredible journeys you will ever go on is truly the journey of understanding yourself and understanding how to be the most you that you can possibly be, unapologetically, with all of your gifts, all of your talents, all of your perfect imperfections, and bring that to the world. Because I'll say this until the cows come home, you are 1 in 8 billion. You are fucking unique. So the very best thing you can possibly do is figure out how to be the most you that you can be. And that's going to involve clearing the mud away from some things, right? Breaking out of some conditioning, understanding your brain and body and how that all works together, and really understanding that ultimately you get to decide how you think about things, which ultimately are going to lead to how you feel about things, which ultimately is going to lead to this amazing positive feedback loop, as opposed to being stuck in this negative feedback loop. So this is the definition of personal power. And it is my firm belief, and I will die on this hill, that if every single person really truly understood how to self-regulate, if every single person took radical self-responsibility for their own emotional reactions, for their own triggers, to heal those triggers, to resolve those triggers, to understand how to continue to show up in the world as the very best version of themselves, uniquely as themselves in any given moment, holy shit, this entire world would shift. So I don't know. Let's try it as a fun experiment because what we've been doing so far clearly hasn't fucking worked. So let's give this a shot and see what happens. So thank you all for coming on this wild ride with me as I skated over the top of super deep topics and the topics that I am so passionate about because I know that they work and because I literally do know that the more you understand this, the more balanced, the more rich, the more fulfilling your life gets. And again, it's not about the things that are happening around you. Everything can be falling the fuck apart around you, but you're not falling apart with it. That is a radical, revolutionary act. That is the kind of revolutionary act that we need every person to embrace. And I don't know, let's just see what happens. All right, I love you all. Sparkle on. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Courage to Rise podcast. Visit my website, couragetorise.com, for more information on one-on-one coaching, group coaching programs, and other upcoming events. Remember, life's too short not to sparkle. Sparkle on.